Thank you, Ross, for that wonderful introduction. So today I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey through the research that I did as part of my Frontline programme and the improvements to my practice that I made with my families. This research is done by one person, me, with the caseload that I had at the time, and as such, it's tentative. Nothing that I say today is absolute the truth. It is approaching maybe a truth that I have looked at. So with that in mind, the starting point for my research was this idea that I had that social workers arrive in families' lives at a time of absolute crisis, when things are their most uncertain, when family life is at its most difficult, when parents and families are facing their biggest challenges. And what I was seeing was that social workers, me, were being seen as not a solution to those problems or necessarily as a help in those difficult times, but as another problem that families had to solve, another complicating factor that families had to face. And I wasn't comfortable with that in my practice. I didn't feel like that was allowing me to be the best social worker that I could be. So I wanted to look at how was I, as a social worker, contributing to that environment, and what could I do about it? And the specific element I chose to really drill down on was thinking about how I could address the ways that I communicated with families and worked with families that was maybe heightening their uncertainty, thinking particularly around things like unannounced visits, or the questions that families ask you, like, are you going to take my children away? Or what happens if XYZ happens or doesn't happen? Questions that maybe we don't have answers to, or elements of our practice that we can't give 100% answers around or be 100% clear around. We can't tell families when we're doing an unannounced visit, because then it's not unannounced. But how can we reduce families' uncertainty around that? So with that in mind, I delved into the social work literature, the social work research. And what I found was that families' uncertainty, or the families that experience the most uncertainty and the greatest anxiety around working with us, are often the ones that are involuntary service users. And social work literature and practical practice tools and guidance are quite bad at dealing with the ethical and moral problems of involuntary service users. They love, there are thousands of articles out there on how to work with the families who turn up to your visits and who are happy to speak to you on the phone and want to be in meetings. And there's not nearly as much on how to engage the families who are involuntary. I think this is actually exemplified by the phrase involuntary service users, which I think is really clunky and doesn't sort of capture the difficulty of the situation, or the fact that the challenges that involuntary service users are facing in working with us. But what I did find was that social work researchers who spoke to families found that families often reported feeling that they had not been given the right information, and the decisions made about them had been arbitrary. A study done by Bell in 2021 studied mothers who had been subject to repeated child removal, and found that they frequently reported not understanding why their child had been removed, and felt that they had not been given an explanation, which flew in the face of everything that I knew about social workers and the way that they work, with endless kind of meetings and visits and reports and everything to try and break down this information and explain it in really approachable ways. Bell, in their article, did acknowledge that these are really traumatic times for parents, and that they are unlikely to be able to really listen to the information that we're giving them because they're in such a heightened state. But none of the articles that I read about working with families in these situations really gave solid recommendations about how to change your communication style in order to manage this. They often talked about building that trusting relationship and building that rapport with families, which we know in that heightened state can be really difficult. I looked to nursing journals. The last two bullet points on this slide are points that I drew from nursing journals, where I turned to look for more practical applications or practical ideas. And the first thing that I thought was interesting was a study that found they were looking at parental uncertainty around children who had just received a long-term diagnosis, so things like childhood cancer. And they found that parental uncertainty around these issues increased and continued to increase months after the stressful event. So applying that to social work, I know that I have practiced, and I think we social workers can practice in such a way where we know that the child protection conference or the court date or the child in need meeting is a peak of stress, but we think that the week or 2 weeks after that, when we go and visit, that stress will have decreased and we will be able to have a more reasonable conversation. And that, or this study found that isn't necessarily the case, that parents can continue to be heightened about these stressful and ongoing things for a long time after the very stressful thing has happened. A study done by Medeo, a nursing study done in 2012, found that I think in a really positive way, parents' uncertainty reduced with just about anything they could do that made them feel in control. So making their child feel more comfortable in hospital, with some of the examples given, or parents feeling that they were researching what was going on for their child, or they were able to speak to their child's experience or represent their child's wishes and feelings to professionals, helped parents to feel more in control, and that reduced their anxiety and their uncertainty in a statistically significant way. And thinking about feeling in control led me back to a theory that I was very familiar with as a social worker, and I'm sure some of you will be as well, which is Mason's safe uncertainty quadrant. This is fundamentally used by professionals to guide our risk assessments and our sense of risk and danger in situations when we're working with families. And when we talk about this in supervisions or in reflections, 3 out of 4 of these quadrants are dismissed quite quickly as places we don't want to be. Safe certainty is unsustainable. It's not achievable. Unsafe uncertainty is also unsustainable in that we know nothing and we don't know anything about what's going on. And then unsafe certainty is a disaster waiting to happen. And unsafe, this is repeating myself, getting lost. Safe uncertainty is the corner that we want to be in. We want to be comfortable that we don't know everything, but we are pretty sure that things are going to be okay. And that reflected to me a sort of professional ability to not be in control of lots of things, to understand that there are lots of things out of your control, but to feel okay about it. And that wasn't the position that families were in. They were out of control of lots of things and didn't feel okay about it. And when I returned to Mason's writing on this, I found that in his 2019 article, he said that, people who lack agency desire a position of safe certainty. When they are out of control of their lives, the place that they want to be is in safe certainty. And while Mason acknowledges that that is unachievable, we can't know everything and know that everything's going to be okay, an element of perceived safe certainty is important. This also links in with John Bing Hall's family therapy theories from the 1990s around feeling safe enough to experiment, that you need to have a bedrock of this works, this is okay, to then be able to manage uncertainty on top of that. And I think all of us can relate to those feelings. We don't wake up doubting everything all of the time, every day. There are things that we assume. We assume the train is going to run on time. We assume that, we know what day the PE kit needs to go in the school bag. We make these assumptions. We work on autopilot that things are going to be okay. And what I was seeing was that families did not have their safe certainty, or they felt that we were challenging their safe certainty, and they weren't happy about that. So before I move on to talk about the findings of my study, I'm going to talk about 2 of the families that I worked with as part of my research. This first family are the 2 quotes in red and green. And they both come from the same parent, and it was a mum that I had worked with for a very, very long time, ever since I was a baby student social worker. And we had gotten into a really unhelpful communication style relationship, where she would phone me up in a really heightened state of anxiety, distress, feeling really uncertain about a lot of things, and she'd be really upset and angry on the phone. And part of her way of expressing that was to volley a load of questions at me, one after the other, just without pausing for breath. And I would try and answer some of those where I could, and I would probably ignore some of the ones that I thought, I don't know how to answer that, or that's not really to do with anything. And then she would hang up the phone on me. And having done all my research and reading and thought about safe certainty and all those things, she phoned me up one day and same volley of questions and everything. And then when she got sort of to the end of her list of things she wanted to say, she said, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say the kids should be with their dad. And a switch flicked in my brain in that moment. Something shifted. And I stopped the conversation there and I said, I can hear how distressed you are and how upset you are about this. This is not the moment to have this conversation. You are so upset that you're not going to hear the information that I'm saying. So what I will do is I'm going to come round tomorrow. Once you've slept, eaten, calmed down, and we're going to talk about it then. And I did. I went round the next day, and unsolicited. This has never happened to me before with this family. Unsolicited, she thanked me for hanging up the phone on her the other day, and said that, acknowledged that she had not been in the right place to have that conversation. And then when she was calm, she'd written down all of her questions for me. I sat and I answered all of her questions for her. And at the end of that conversation, I said, I feel like I'm doing you a bit of a disservice. I feel like I'm not very good at answering the questions that you want me to ask and explaining the things that you want me to explain. And I feel like I'm not doing that in a way that's helpful for you. And she said, this green quote, you're always very good at explaining things. It's just sometimes I'm not able to listen, which matched up exactly, bizarrely, with the research I've been doing earlier about, parents who are not in a place to listen to what was going on. And I'm skipping ahead a bit, but I went back into my car and I drew this purple bubble, which is on this next slide, where what I was seeing was that this parent was having an experience of uncertainty. And within that, there were two, probably more, but for the purposes of this, two separate experiences. Her emotional response to the uncertainty and her practical need for more information. And I, as the professional and as the calm person in that environment, could treat those two experiences as separate things. So I was able to respond to her emotions separately, and then when she was calm, come back and respond to her practical need for information. And that ultimately led to the case being closed, because that meant that I was only sharing important information with her when she really was able to hear it. And she understood it more, she took it on board more, and we were able to close the case. This second family are the purple quote on the right hand side of the screen. And this was a family who really didn't want to engage with us. She wasn't aggressive or hostile with us, mum of this family, but she just retreated. She just wouldn't answer phone calls, wouldn't arrange visits, wouldn't allow unannounced visits, would just retreated into silence. And I tried lots and lots of things to try and get her out of her shell, and to try and work with her, and none of it was really working. And that's where this quote comes from, is that I was having lots of conversations with her about, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And she was just, every time, I don't know, I've not thought about it. I've never really thought about it before. And it was really frustrating for me to go, yeah, I'm doing my best here. And that was when I started to rehypothesize around being a social worker, coming into her house, speaking to her children, represented a huge amount of uncertainty. She couldn't be in control of what I was going to say, what I was going to ask her, what I was going to ask her children, what I was going to talk about that day that might have been really difficult for her. But she could control whether or not I came into her house or whether or not she spoke to me on the phone. And that was her element of safe certainty. That was what she was able to be in control of. So my work then started to renegotiate that with her. So I started meeting her outside of her home. So in neutral spaces where she could leave as much as I could, if you see what I mean. Or I would say, look, I'm going to phone you tomorrow at this time, or you're going to have an unannounced visit within the next week or within the next 3 days, and really rethinking how I spoke to her about things and how I explained things to her. And also how I worked with her to reduce her uncertainty around it. I also named it with her. I said, I think you're really nervous about us being here, and I want to know what you're worried about, what you're afraid of when it comes to social workers. And that gave us little, I mean, baby steps, little ins of experiences that she'd had before, or problems that she'd faced previously, and we were able to slowly address those. And it felt, and what was also true is that I took this forward with other families and was able to be much more explicit with them about where I was handing control over, what I was, you know, as part of plans or as part of visiting schedules or whatever, what parents were in control of, what I was putting them in control of, what they, you know, could take control of, things like that. And in some ways that was helpful to me, because when we think about empowering families, I sometimes feel like empowerment is quite a woolly word, and it's quite difficult to kind of define for families, and particularly when they're in really difficult situations. But saying you're in control of this, or are you okay to manage being in control of this, felt much more concrete and like a much more clear way of communicating to families. You can do this. I believe that you can do this because I'm handing this over to you as your responsibility. So these are the findings from my study. We've discussed the purple bubble in the middle, that parents often have a overarching experience of uncertainty that constitutes an emotional and a practical need within that, and that by addressing those two things as separate conversations and sometimes separate moments, it was easier for me to reduce the uncertainty that parents were experiencing. And it was also easier to feel justified in revisiting conversations as many times as possible. We work in a very fast-paced, very kind of high-pressure environment, and sometimes revisiting conversations can feel like we are just repeating ourselves and not getting anywhere. But thinking about, you know, if every conversation I was having with this family was getting really emotionally heightened, I would go, no, we're still in the emotional phase of this here, and until we are able to get to the practical phase, I've not fully communicated what's going on, which obviously sometimes isn't possible because of time constraints, but we do what we can. And it also really helped me to really re-hypothesize around why families were retreating from us or being hostile or rejecting social care, to think about what were they not in control of? What did they want to be in control of? What were they using as their safe certainty, their locus of safe certainty? And was I, you know, poking at that, I guess? Was I interrupting that for them? And what could I do about that? What could I do to make that easier for them to navigate? And like I said, thinking about meeting them in a neutral space, phoning them at pre-allotted times of the day, you know, letting them know what a visit was going to be about before I arrived, things like that. And underneath all of that is the good relationship building that we do with all of our families anyway. So this is my last slide, and these are just a few bullet points. I'm not going to go through them all, but a few bullet points about what I have taken forward into my practice. And I'm now working in a different local authority in a different role from where I started this research, but I have really noticed in myself a real different ability to depersonalize the hostility and the rejection we sometimes experience from service users, and to really hold space for their emotions about a situation, and also to communicate clearly and differently and better in a way that I wasn't able to before, in a way that I'm confident reduces the uncertainty for that family. And I will much more confidently keep going back over something, and not worry about repeating myself or you know, sounding like a broken record to families, that I will go, no, I will keep saying this until I'm certain that you've really heard it. And that's it. Any questions? I also have a bibliography here that I think these slides are going to be shared afterwards. So there's lots of boring readings that you can do if you would like to. But I hope very much that I've done that so that you don't have to. There we go. I'll stop sharing that.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of the slide deck will be shared for people afterwards. I mean, firstly, from my perspective, just listening to that, I think you were able to bring some of the really practical elements of emotive practice to life really, really well. And, you know, some of your examples, you know, I'm sure I could certainly resonate with me when I was in practice and for those listening. So thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions. I'm just going to deal with Rebecca's question first of all, which is in two parts, but I'm going to ask the second part first. What would you say to your student social worker self, maybe now that you know more about this topic? I think is an interesting one.
So I think one of the things I felt really strongly as a student social worker is that I didn't have the answers to any questions. I was a student, I didn't know very much. And I felt really self-conscious that if I was on the other side, if the coin was flipped and I was the service user and I was experiencing myself as a social worker, I would be really, really unhappy with the fact that a professional in my life couldn't answer the questions that were being asked of me. And if I were to go back to my student social worker self, I would say that is not the important thing. The important thing is not your ability to answer every question, you know, thrown at you in any situation off the top of your head. What matters is your reliability, that you say, I don't know that, I'm going to go and find out, and that you remember that and that you get back to that is what I find service users remember, not your top of the brain knowing everything.
Great, thank you. And the second element to Rebecca's question was, I suppose, about have you any thoughts about how to share this research with student social workers? I suppose part of doing this presentation might be that, but I mean, have you shared it anywhere else in terms of your research?
Not specifically. I've shared it at team meetings and things with colleagues in my previous local authority, but not broader than that as yet, which is part of the reason why I'm here.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. A question from Jamie, I think is driven more potentially about the how you managed doing the project alongside your caseload in year two. Oh, yeah. So how challenging was it to manage a research-driven project at the same time as a growing caseload for maybe those that are listening and are about to or embarking on their studies in year two?
Yeah. So if you are embarking on your studies in year two, I'm going to say the same thing that you've heard from I'm sure all of your frontline staff, which is because you are researching about your practice and your work, it does flow like quite naturally. You end up thinking about it a lot at work. You end up really taking opportunities in your sessions to do your research and to include your families in your research, and it doesn't become that burdensome along the way, if that's sort of answering that question. Having said that, there are, you know, lost weekends and late nights, but I think that's part of the joy of writing a dissertation.
I think that's a good reframe for those people that are finding it less than a joy at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Lean in to the late nights and the Saturday afternoons.
There's a question that was asked from Samaya, but I think you did answer it in terms of how, if you didn't have that knowledge, you suggested that you would go away. Yeah. The key thing is about being consistent and coming back to revisit it. So I think you have answered that. Pat's asked a question which links, and I know having read your dissertation, you do touch on it, but with these 3 case studies, did your social graces play a part or impact on how you approach the family? And if so, can they ask how, if you're willing to share that?
Yeah, so the families that I worked with as part of this were all white British and worked with me, and the biggest thing that I think interacted with it was class. The biggest social grace that came up for me was class, and that was because I'm from a very middle class background, and when thinking about dealing with professionals or solving problems, I had the ability to let me be clear. When I was dealing with professionals myself as a private individual, I had both the money and the education to be able to distance myself from the professionals that I was working with and not invest huge amounts in this person is in charge of my housing, my children, the benefits that I get, that I was able to go, do you know what, if I don't agree with you, I can pay for a second opinion or pay to solve this problem, or I can go elsewhere. And what I was finding was that I was working with families who did not have the same class background as me, who weren't didn't have the same privileges, and therefore were investing so much more in the professionals that they were working with, because there was so much more on the line, there was so much more at stake. And I think we all know from working with housing and housing lists and homelessness that this is about a roof over people's heads at the end of the day, and about the safety of their family, and that's huge. And I wasn't dealing well with the emotional element of the uncertainty because I wasn't seeing it, I wasn't recognizing it properly, and this research really helped me to do that.
Great, thank you. We've got a comment, I think, from George. I'll read that out in just a second. But I actually had an additional question. I noticed from your findings that you say that one of the things that helped you is to be more confident in having difficult conversations. Now, I always think it's interesting as to what we class as a difficult or challenging conversation, but like, how did you develop that greater sense of confidence? Do you know what I mean? For those that are listening and find that challenging, what was it that you tried to do to develop confidence when maybe you started? Do you know what I mean? Because confidence is tricky, I think.
So this is maybe not included in my dissertation, but it is the true answer to this question. I was in a conversation once with a family where the parents were very upset about all this information that they felt had not been shared with them by other professionals, that concerns had been raised by other professionals and had not been appropriately shared with them. And my reflection on that conversation, I walked away going, it's me. If I am not telling these parents the truth, if I'm not telling them exactly what is going on, I cannot rely on anyone else doing that. That I'm the social worker, and if they don't know from me, they might not know. And that gave me the confidence to really reword how I was, to not couch things in gentle language, to not walk away from a conversation going, oh, the health visitor will back that up next time they go. No, it's my responsibility professionally to let that parent know what is being said about their child, because they need to know. That's, it's their right to know. And that helped me to go, right, am I walking away from this conversation feeling that parent has actually understood what we are worried about and what is being said really clearly? If another social worker were to go in and go, what did so-and-so say to you yesterday? Would they remember? Would they repeat it in a recognizable way? And that helped me to go, it doesn't matter, I guess, what's going on for me or what emotions come out in that situation. I can go back and try again, but does that parent understand?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. I'm just going to quickly go through Georgie's point. So I just highlighted that it resonated very much in terms of the experience of those two elements of uncertainty, the emotional response, and a need for information. As a student social worker, being aware of your own needs in uncertainty helps you position yourself to support families with uncertainty. And then thanking you for your point around the class state. So just coming to the end of our 30 minutes, we said at the start it goes so quick, but thank you so much, Rachel, in terms of your presentation today and for taking time to answer those questions. It's really, really informative and interesting. So thank you.